Go ahead and start this video here with the finished product of what we're going to be making. It's a 3D laser map, multiple layers of wood with a blue poster board backing on there. I'm going to be cutting this on my Atomstack A5 M50 Pro laser, and then I'll be using Snazzy maps, Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, and then Lightburn to get everything set up to create these layers and build everything out. As you're going through, I'll have chapter points, so feel free to skip around to the exact information you want. And hopefully you'll find this useful and it'll give you everything you need to get started building your own 3D laser maps. With that, we'll go ahead and dive right into Snazzy Maps, and I'll show you how to go through the entire process. We'll begin our design process here on snazzymaps.com. It's a very easy to use tool that leverages the Google Maps system to create and build out custom maps and layers that we'll be using when we're doing our cuts and engraving on the laser. From the main site here, we're going to go to create a style. We can leave it on the default. We're going to be changing everything anyway, so it won't really matter, and then click apply style. Before we start changing any of these features, let's go ahead and minimize this. We want to get everything positioned into the area on the map that you want to use, and then get to a zoom level that's going to allow you to show all the points of interest that you're interested in including, as well as if you can get an area that has a good chunk of water, some parks, and other distinguishing features, it's going to make your map look a lot better and feel a lot more custom and built for the user that you're creating it for, whether it's a friend, family, or even for yourself. So I'm going to get it positioned right about here. That's going to give me everything I need. I've got a few POIs over here in the top left and then down the bottom left. Once we're positioned correctly within the map, we're going to go ahead and bring out our controls. And the first thing we'll do is go to all, and just turn everything off. You can see now we just have a completely blank canvas with absolutely nothing on it. And that's going to allow us to build up the different layers that we want to show for either cutting out or engraving on the map. The one I like to do first is the water layer. So I'm going to come down here, I'm going to select water, go to geometry, set the visibility to on, and then set the lightness to the minimum, which is -100. Once I do that, you can see now on this canvas, you can see your land masses as well as the waterways, rivers, the ocean, everything like that. What you want to do a lot of times is tweak here with the weight to determine what shows up and what doesn't. You can see here as I do that, the smaller tributaries kind of come away and it just leaves a cleaner map for doing the water. And this is going to be our base. Snazzy Maps does include the ability to do an export of the image for you. However, I don't go that route. I like using the built-in screenshot capability to save the entire window. And the reason I do that is it gives me a little bit more wiggle room when I'm building out the design within Illustrator and then later in Lightroom. Having the wider or larger image to work with allows me to kind of adjust the positioning to get it exactly where I want. So on Windows, to do this, I'm going to hold the Windows key and hit Shift and S, and that's going to allow me to go in here to screenshot. I'm going to go up here and make sure I do Window, and then select my entire browser window. You can see down here now that saved a screenshot of that entire screen that I'll be able to work with to crop everything in Photoshop here in just a few minutes. With the water layer done, we're going to go ahead and again and expand out our side control panel here. We're going to turn water off. We can just do that by doing the reset visibility. And we're going to go to road, highway, geometry, and again, just like we did on water, we're going to turn that on. We're going to set the lightness to the minimum. And that's going to show us the highways. Now, for this map, there's only one major road going through everything because it's an island. Depending on your location, you're going to need to tweak what you put on this layer. The point of this layer, this is going to be the one that sits on top of the water layer that you cut out and engrave upon. And it's going to be what you use for attaching all of your labels, whether that's for a road name, a building, POI, whatever it might be. So in my case, I need to add a few more roads on there. So I'm going to come down here and select arterial, go to geometry, on, and I'm going to again set its lightness down all the way down. Now, that doesn't add a huge amount to it, but it does add me enough for those cross-section streets now that I'll have more areas where I can attach my labels for the POIs. So again, like I did with the water, I'm going to do the Win, Shift, S, save the entire window. We'll expand out the controls. We're going to turn off the arterial, turn off the highways, and we're going to turn on the local roads. And again, we'll do visibility on, lightness to the minimum. And this is going to be an engraving layer. So this goes onto the layer where we do the cutout for the water. And this is what gives us the engraving of the streets to give a little bit more detail. I'm going to leave it like here. I can tweak the structure a bit when I do it in Illustrator, when I do my black and white tracing. So I'll go ahead and again, Win-Shift-S, save the entire window. And now I need one more layer. I'll expand this out one more time. I'll turn off my local roads. And this is one I don't see a lot of people doing, and it's going to come down to your personal preference. You get to determine exactly what you include on the map, what doesn't make sense. I like to have the parks on there, and I do those at a lighter engraving layer. It just adds a little bit more detail and a little bit more design quality onto the map. So I'll do the parks at a light engraving. I'll do the local roads at a dark engraving. Then I'll cut out the water. And of course, we have the major roads and labels that sits on top of that as a second layer. For our final layer here with the parks, again, we'll Win-Shift-S, save that screen. And now we have all of the layers we need. We have our water layer, we have our main roads, we have our local roads, and we have our parks. So the next step is we're going to take these into Photoshop. We're going to do a little bit of custom tweaking on them to crop everything down. And then we'll go into Illustrator to build out the final design for it. Here in Photoshop, I've opened up just one of the screenshots I did. It doesn't really matter which one you start with. In my case, I went with the water layer. I do this rather than starting with a blank canvas or template because it allows me to make sure I have all of the settings correct for the resolution, your DPI, image mode, and everything like that. Once you have one open, you're going to go ahead and drag in each of the others and have them come in as a separate layer. So there's my main roads, local roads, and then parks. And the reason I do it like this is, of course, now they're all stacked on the exact same structure with the exact same layout, so I know everything's going to be aligned. By doing it this way, it allows me to go through here and I can crop it on one layer, and I can ensure that each of the other layers is going to be cropped and set to the exact same positioning. Before I start doing that, though, I'm going to go down here to my layers, and I'm going to rename them based on what they are. So that is my water layer, that's my main roads, local roads, and my parks. And I do this so that when I'm doing my export here in a moment, it automatically just pulls in the name of that layer for the file name. It just makes it a little bit easier to work with everything. With my layers renamed, we're going to do our cropping. The cropping is really just to get rid of the browser header and the little labels that show up from the Google Maps piece of it. So we'll start over here, just grab from there, we'll come over, and we'll stop there. Let's see here. You can see here I've got a little bit of the Google text in the bottom, so I'm going to hold down the Alt key and subtract out that section. And now we've got a decent layout that gives us none of the framing, but gives us the image. So we'll go to Image and Crop. With that done now, we can go through here. We can export each of the layers to allow us to pull those into Illustrator to work with it. So to do that, we're just going to right click on each layer and do a quick export as PNG. I'll make a new folder here for the map I'm working with. Save in parks. Take the local roads, quick export as PNG. The reason I'm doing the right click and not just the hotkeys is because I only want to do each individual layer, not the full image. That way everything is separated out, so when I pull it into Illustrator, it's a little bit easier to work with pieces. And then the water.png. And with that, we're done. I did this in Photoshop. You can do this in whatever tool of preference you have. GIMP works well. Anything where you can pull in the layers, you can do cropping, and you can export your layers as individual images. So with that done, we're going to go ahead and hop over into Adobe Illustrator, and I'll start showing you the process of building out those map layers that'll work friendly with Lightburn. Here in Adobe Illustrator, we're going to start with a template file that I've created. There's not much to it, but I'll go through all the different pieces to kind of give you an idea, and I can make this available to anyone that needs it as well. What I've done is I've got a layer up here with all my custom map icons. One thing that you can do to help your map that you're making either for friends, family, or even if you decide to sell them, is having those custom icons. So I've got a set of theater masks, a little house, a sea turtle, a poppy paw print I created, a heart, and then just a little generic circle icon for things. This allows you to create those custom icons and set up the really nice POI labels on your map so that you can call out and have a lot of nice attention to detail. You'll also want to add labels for each of your roads, and I'll go through that here in a moment, but you can use whatever you want for those. I just tend to use generic rectangles. The key pieces I have, though, is I've got a layer here for the framing, which is going to be the border rectangle, and then the box here in the top right corner. That box is going to be where you're going to put the name of the location. In my case, it's going to be Amelia Island. And of course, put that in whatever corner makes the most sense, depending on where your detail is going to be. In this case, a lot of my detail is going to be in the top left corner, and I've got that ocean space over in the top right. So leaving that box over there in the top right just seems to make a lot of sense. Aside from the framing, I have a layer for each of the main layers in the map: the cutout roads, the engraved roads, the parks, and the water. Each of those is pretty much exactly the same. I have a rectangle on them that allows me to have that standard consistent border and framing for everything, so that when I'm lining everything up, I can make sure all my dimensions are exactly the same. And then the second piece that's very important is I have a clip group that uses that rectangle as a top layer. This allows me, when I'm doing my imports, to make sure that everything will be clipped to the exact dimensions I need for my map or my frame, without having to worry about repositioning everything, resizing anything, or anything like that that can cause some challenges in getting everything lined up exactly right. Like I said, each of my layers is exactly like that. It has the rectangle, the clip group with the rectangle as the clipping mask in it. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and save this off as a new version onto my computer. Save it in the new Amelia Island, and we'll call it New Amelia Island. Get that done. That's just, again, so I always have that template available. And the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn off most of these layers for now and just work on the water layer. And what I'm going to want to do on the water layer is go ahead and import in or pull in that image I created, the one that we did the cropping in Photoshop. And we'll go ahead and pull that in and onto this layer. So I'll just drag and drop it and drop it right there. What I'd like to do when I'm pulling this in is I'm going to resize them. So if I go here and I look at my rectangle on the properties for it, you can see the dimensions of that. It's 19.1528. So when I go back to this, I'm going to go ahead and leave them linked and do 19.258. And then we'll go ahead and center it and center it. And now that's going to be the exact same dimensions as the box height-wise. And again, this is what I was talking about, where having the extra width or horizontal dimension on it allows me to reposition everything. I'll go ahead and drag this link file down in here into my clip group. And this is what I was talking about. By dragging it down in that clip group with that rectangle there, now the water is cropped to only include what is part of or inside of that rectangle, or the square in this case. Once the image is loaded in and positioned exactly where you want it, we're going to go through and use the image trace functionality, and that's going to convert this over to a collection of paths for us. It'll make it easier to work with everything and give us a better result when we import it into Lightburn. So what I'm going to do with the image still selected, I'm going to go down to my image trace window down here. I'm going to change the preset to black and white logo. I'm going to expand advanced, and I'm going to tell it to ignore the background color. That'll pull out the white. So it's only going to be pulling in those black areas. And what you want to do is when you're working with this, you're going to want to tweak the paths, corner, and noise settings. When you're playing with those values, you'll notice that the look and feel of the map is going to adjust based upon what you're building or what your settings are. So depending on how detailed or how ornate the detail is in the layer you're working on, you want to play with those bars and kind of get them to the right settings you want. You see here, more paths is going to give it a little bit more detail, so it's going to follow the lines and edges a bit more. If we change the curves up, doesn't really do much on this one. There's not, because this is a lot of connected lines for the paths, so we'll leave those back at the default of 50%. The noise can become very handy when you're working on something that has a lot of very tiny lines going in it. It's going to determine what area gets ignored. So you can see here, if I go all the way up, it tweaks it a little bit. If I bring it all the way down, things pop back in. And this just allows you to kind of crop out pieces. You can do all this in Lightburn as well. When you edit it, after you import it in there, you can ungroup everything and then pull out the individual pieces you don't want. But you can also do it here as you're working through everything. I'm going to leave it like this for this example. I'm going to turn off preview, and I'm going to tell it to go ahead and trace. And then I'll go up to object and expand, do the object and fill. And now what you can see now is we have a group that is all of the paths making up our water area. I'm going to go ahead and select it. I'm going to change its properties and make it blue. Ultimately, we'll want the settings to be exactly what we want before we export everything, but going with blue on everything will allow me to see exactly how everything's laid out. And when I do my layers, I can do each of them in a different color to make sure everything lines up and looks the way I want it to. With our water layer done, I'm going to go back up to layers. I'm going to lock that layer. I'm going to show back the parks, go to the clip group, and I'm going to drag and drop in the image for parks. Okay, we're going to go ahead and center it and align it. Just like we did on the other one, you can again go back to your rectangle if you need to. We can see that it's a 19.1528. So we'll go to the image, we'll pull it down into our clip group, change it to the height of 19.1528. We'll go to the image trace. We're going to do again black and white logo, hide the background. Parks, again, it's a very simple one. We don't really need to tweak any of the values, so we'll turn off the preview again. We'll trace, object, expand, and for this one, we'll go ahead and set it to green for the coloring on it. Okay, and so now at this point, we've got our water, we've got our parks, and now we'll start working on bringing in the roads. For the roads, I'm going to go ahead and do this on the engraved roads layer. Let me go ahead and lock parks first. I'll go ahead and show the framing layer for now, just so it's there. We'll go to engraved roads, we'll show that, show that, expand it out. To drag in the local roads. We'll make it the properties height 19.1528. Align, align. Back to the layer, make sure just that file is there in the clipped group. Preset, black and white logo, ignore background color. And now you can see what it's doing is it's adding these roads on top of there. And the way we're stacking everything, this is going to show you how we're going to engrave the roads and how it'll look going on top of the parks onto the layer where we're cutting out the water as well. A lot of times this local roads is one you'll need to tweak on the settings to either simplify it out or to build out the paths to make sure everything kind of looks exactly the way you want it to. I'm actually going to leave that the way it was. Play with this a little bit, get it to kind of look like the roads the way I want. There we go. That's cleaned up some of those lines for me. We'll go ahead and turn off the preview, trace, object, expand. We'll make these roads a dark gray instead of the blacks. We use a black for the top roads to kind of see everything. So there we are. So now we've got our layers that is our kind of our background. So this is what's going to be our cutout, and then the parks and the roads on top of it. It'll determine how everything is laid out on that backing layer. We'll go ahead and lock our engraved roads layer. And now we'll work on the cutout roads. It's going to be the layer that sits on top of everything to attach our labels and everything like that. For the cutout roads, it's going to be the exact same process. We'll go ahead and enable that one. Go ahead and select down to our clip group. We'll drag and drop in that image. Set its properties once again to the 19.1528. Center layer, make sure it's selected. We'll pull that down into the clip group. Black and white logo, ignore the background color. And again, this is another one where the roads are simple enough. We don't really need to worry about doing anything else with them. So we'll just go ahead and turn on the preview and do the trace. Object, expand. And there we have it. So again, like I was saying, the top road is going to be a cutout on the wood, and that's going to sit on top of there. So you want to make sure that it connects onto your frame in some way to hold it in place. In this case, it connects on the bottom. I'm also going to be adding in some labels that will help connect it a little bit further into certain areas to allow everything to be a very solid top layer and make sure it's not flimsy. This layer with the rows is going to be on the same piece. It has this framing with this cutout here at the top. So it allows you to kind of see exactly what everything's going to look like in your final product. With all of our layers finished now for the actually import of the images, I'm going to show you how to just go through and add in the different icons and set up everything for your road labels and your POIs. In this case, I want to go ahead and I still want to keep my cutout layer unlocked because that's what I'm going to be working everything on. But I'm going to go ahead and re-show my map icons to start pulling everything in. The first thing I'm going to pull in for this one is I'm going to pull in the icon for the house or the hotel. Put that down here in the clip group. We'll bring it up here. Make this a little bit bigger. And again, you want to make sure everything is connecting, because when we're pulling this into Lightburn, the way everything kind of connects here is going to be what determines how everything cuts and connects together. So we've got that there. The next thing I'm going to pull in is I'm going to pull in a turtle, because there's a section of turtle nest that we really like. So we'll go ahead and bring that in again to the cutout roads. Go ahead and put that right here. Actually, I'm going to rotate this. Let's get in here a little bit more. That way it's connected on like that. And you want to spend a good amount of time doing this. You want to make sure everything is aligned exactly how it is. You don't want some weird clipping going through where a label pushes through the road or pushes through the border. So spend your time going in through here and getting all your POIs laid out exactly how you want to. I'm going to stop the video here for a moment. I'm going to go ahead and load in all my other POIs and my road labels, because there's not really much to it. But I will come back into Illustrator here at the end and show you exactly how everything looks before we start importing it into Lightburn. Back here in Illustrator now, I finished laying out all of the different markers for the POIs and the streets that I want. You can see here I've got the little condo with the text on there. I've got a few street labels. I just did circles for the restaurants, the POIs that I want to show on there. And then I've got that turtle, just going to mark where the turtle nests are. When you're going through this, it's going to come down to a lot of personal preference based upon what sort of markers you're putting on there, how many you have, how they're grouped up, and what is really important to you, whether you want to show like a heart for someone's home or whatever it may be. So I really encourage you to play around with it and find out what's going to work best for you to give you that look you're wanting. But one thing I do want to call out here is all of these labels are on a separate label layer. And the reason I do that is because when I'm going to get these ready to export, which I'll do here in just a moment, I'm going to export them as a PNG to then import into Lightburn and do the trace over there. The reason I do PNG rather than SVG is because I'm using the clip groups to kind of cut things off. The SVG is going to show the full path, even the area that is clipped out by the image, whereas a PNG is going to honor that. And for me, when I'm working with it this way, it gives me a lot more control to line things up and get it exactly how I want it to be. And I don't have to worry as much about cutting off all of the lines, truncating it, and losing the ability to come back in here and shift things around if my first pass on Lightburn doesn't look the way I want it to be. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just start collecting things for export and building out my PNGs. And the first one I'm going to do here will be on the cutout roads as well as the framing. So we'll go ahead and select those. We'll right click, collect for export as a single asset. We'll go ahead and call this main roads and frame. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and hide those. And we'll come here to our engraved roads. We'll select that, collect it for export as a single asset. We'll call that one engraved roads. And we'll hide that one, and we'll show our parks. Well, actually, we don't have to show them, but we'll select our parks, right click, collect for export as a single asset, parks, and then we'll hide that one. For water, we're going to do it a little bit differently. The reason we're going to do it a little bit differently is, of course, for the water, we want the water pieces of it to be what's cut out rather than the landmass to be what is cut out. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and show a backing black layer. I'm going to go to the water itself. I'm going to make it white. And then go back to the layers. And the reason for that now is when I do this and I do the right click, collect for export as a single asset, it's now inverted. So it's going to cut around the water rather than doing it the other way. It gives you exactly what you want to make sure that the waterways and pieces are going to be the cutout, and what was a landmass is going to remain affixed and stay stable within there for when you're doing your cutouts with your frame. So with that, I'll go ahead and re-show everything except the labels. And we will go ahead and name this one our water layer. Select all of them. We're going to do them at a 4x scale PNG, and we'll do an export. We're going to just do them into that new Amelia Island folder I created, so we'll select that folder. And once that has finished exporting, now what we have is PNGs of just those layers. So we've got our engraved roads, the top layer looks a little blurry because it's still loading in. We've got our parks, and then we've got our water layer. So those are all of our layers kind of built out. And now we'll hop over into Lightburn, and I'll start importing those in Lightburn and building out the structure in there. Before we go into Lightburn, I wanted to jump back in and show a very important piece that I forgot originally that will completely change how this works. For the engraved roads and the parks layer, before you export them, or really at any point, the rectangle here that is visible on the layer, not the one that's in the clip group, but the one that's on the outside of the clip group, you want to make sure that it is set to a white color for the stroke. This is exceptionally important, and I'll show you why right now. We'll just do it with just the roads layer. So I'll turn back off the parks. So if the rectangle surrounding it is black for the border, and we'll go ahead and go back to the layer, and we will collect it for export once more, and we'll call it bad roads, and then we will export that one, and that's fine. If I do an import, if I do the bad roads that has the black border, we'll go ahead and set it to the 182 millimeter, and then we will trace it, Alt T, it's fine. Do the basswood, or actually Lightwood, any dark and gray fast. With that black border, when I go in here and I look at the preview for it, you can see it's going to be an hour and 32 minutes because it's doing everything. So it's got to do everything to hit that framing border as well. Now, if I instead do the import of the one with the white border, we'll do the exact same, though 182, Alt-T, trace it, set it to the dark and gray fast, just like that. It's now 44 minutes. So when you have a lot of detail there, it cuts your time in about half by using that white framing border rather than the black framing border, because Lightburn doesn't try to then go around and edge everything with the fill. I forgot to do that and go over that when I was doing my initial exports, so I wanted to jump back here at the end and show you that very important step. All right, so here in Lightburn, we'll just start with a blank project. We'll hit Control-I to import, and we'll start with our water layer first. Once that's imported, I'm going to resize that. For my shadow boxes, I need to do a 182 by 182 square. That gets there, and I'll go ahead and move to the bottom left. We'll go ahead and hit Alt-T to do the trace. You can go in here and tweak it if you need to. More often than not, I've never had to tweak this, but in case you want to go in there and look and make sure everything's etching and cutting out the way you need it to, you can look in here. But I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK. And now that gives me my backing cut water layer. For this one, I'm going to be using my 1/16 inch basswood. I'm going to cut on my honeycomb, so I'll sign that up. And what that is for my 1/16 basswood on my Atomstack is going to be a 300 millimeter per minute speed, 90% max power with 2 passes. That allows me to get very nice clean cuts, and I've not have to worry about any of the charring coming up on there. So we'll go ahead and have that like there. We'll go ahead and hit Control-I to do the next import, and we're going to bring in the engraved roads. Again, we'll set that to 182 millimeters. Move that down to the bottom left, Alt-T. See that's there. Get that traced. We'll move that to a new layer, and then we'll assign it. So there we go. Okay. That has our water layer being cut, our streets being engraved. We'll move that up so it does the engraving first before it does a cut. Now we're going to do one more import of our parks. Control-I, resize to 182, Alt-T to trace. Yep, that's fine. Move to the bottom left. We're going to move that to another separate layer. And this one is going to be the shaded background engrave. So we'll assign that up. And then we'll go ahead and move that up here so it goes first. So now what we're doing is we're going to be doing a light, kind of a very faint engraving for the parks. Then after that, we'll go over it and we'll do a dark engraving for the roads. And then after that's finished, we'll go through and we'll do the cutout for the actual water. So we'll go ahead and save this down here into the new Amelia Island base layer. And there we have it. So that gives us everything we need to be able to cut out and engrave the bottom layer of the map. So now we'll do a File, New, and we'll go ahead and import our main roads layer. And just like the other one, we want to resize that down to 182. Move it to the bottom left. Alt-T, Alt-T to trace it. And this one is again going to be the 1/16 cut on honeycomb. And there you have it. So now we've got our top layer that's going to be cut out for the roads that are going to sit on top of the water layer. So now the next step is we need to go through and re-add our text labels onto here. And again, the reason we do this is this allows us to have that really more detailed control over the fonts and how everything's going to look as it comes through in here. This is another one. It's going to take me a bit to line everything up and build it all out. So I'm going to stop the video and then I'll come back here in a moment. You can see how everything's laid out with the labels and we can go through the actual cutting process. And here we are with the finished product now. So I went through and I just added in the standard text to build out the frame box and then all of the different points of interest. For these on the fill, I'm using my dark text engrave for light wood, which is a speed of 3,000 millimeters per minute at a power of 100%. And that allows me to get the nice deep engravings for the good look I want on the text. It allows it to be nice and clear without overburning or anything along those lines. And that's all there is to it now. One thing you can do is select this, ungroup it, and then move this outer frame to its own separate layer. That would still be your standard cut. And that way it's cut last. So it goes through and it does the fill, it does the inner cuts, and then it does the outer cuts. That's just to allow you to make sure that everything stays lined up. Sometimes, depending on how your air assist is going, or if your layout isn't perfectly flat, if you do that outer cut first, then the material can shift and you can get things not looking the way you want to. So that's really all there is to it now. You saw we went from the Snazzy maps, screenshotting it, into Photoshop to crop it, into Illustrator to trace it and build out your clipping masks to get the design the way you want to. And then we exported those as PNGs to pull into Lightburn here to create this layout. The next thing we're going to do is I'm just going to have that really sped up version of the laser going through and actually cutting each of the layers so you can see that. And then we'll come back at the very end and we'll just kind of wrap things up and go over any of the final bits and pieces that we're doing on here. So here we go. And now we're all set with the layers to do our final assembly. So I'll go over each of the layers here first so you can see the detail, and then we'll put it together into the Shadowbox. So this is, of course, our top layer with the shapes for the different points of interest and the text on there. The text is all very legible. It's nice and clean, nice and crisp lines for the cutouts. There is a little bit of blurring there. You can see on the turtle nests. I need to actually polish my laser. I haven't done that in a while to give it a good cleaning, so I need to do that through that. And then, of course, the base layer for the cutout for the water, as well as the dark, crisp lines for the roads, and then the shading in there for the different parks areas. It turns out this one's actually not a really good one to demonstrate how it looks with the parks, because the biggest section of park is up here in the top right, and that's going to be covered up by the hotel icon logo and the rectangle for the location space. But you can kind of see how it gives it distinct shading to give a nice differentiator on the map. So if you're doing an area like in New York, Chicago, anywhere with a major city that has some nice parks, you can get some really good detail coming through on everything. And a backing layer will just be a nice piece of blue cardstock, and that's to give us that water look for it. So with it all assembled, we have those pieces go like that. The roads sit on top of it like so. And that will be our final map. So I'm going to take it off to the side. I'm going to glue it all up and get it installed into that Shadowbox so we can have that finished product that you saw at the very beginning. And here we are back with the finished map, all sealed up inside the Shadowbox. Everything's glued down and finished in here. I really like the way these look. You have a lot of flexibility on what you want to do with your icons and your labels and your POIs, so you can really make them custom and have them demonstrate your personal style when you're building these out. I've made quite a few of these for friends and families for various locations all across the United States. And a lot of them comes down to is finding that location that has the water, and a good section with the maps and everything like that is going to help be a key driver for getting that really nice quality look in your maps. Hopefully everyone found this video useful and it can get you started on building out your own laser cut maps. If you have any suggestions or criticisms or comments of any kind, I'd love to hear them down below. I'm always looking for ways to improve the way I do things, both on the products I'm making and the way I'm doing these videos. So please let me know any tips or suggestions or comments you might have. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up, and good luck to everyone. I hope you have a great time out there with your lasers.